Well, actually, you asked Mike to do this, and Mike pawned it off on me. So, so here I am. I don't even think he's here. Maybe he's working today. Maybe he's mountain biking. I'm not really sure. But yeah, like Doug said, he asked us to do this pretty early in the season in January, and there was a lot of season ahead of us still in January. So he's like, yeah, just tell us some of the challenges of a season like this. So the original title was Operational Challenges of an Atypical Season. It continued to get worse, and it kind of felt like this never-ending November for like 6 weeks. So then the title, because Doug badgered us about 4 weeks later, we need a title for your talk. And I was like, all right, how about the Endless November, Notes from the Thinnest Season on Record? Well, it continued to get worse, and this is a mantra that has repeated itself in the snow safety office for most of the season, in that sometimes there was some pretty good skiing up on Lone Mountain. And so we tell ourselves, it really could be worse. It just never has been any worse than it is. So yeah, that one's sticking with me. It's sort of a shrouded optimism with a hard dose of reality at the end of it. But sometimes that's life, right? So by worse, I mean we had a record-setting season, not like some records, but the type of records no one likes to talk about. And the record I'm talking about is this. We're pretty much setting a new record low SWE at the Lone Mountain Snowtell site for the majority of the ski season. So we're setting history, and hopefully we don't have to set any new record lows anytime soon with this new low bar. So yeah, record low SWE at Lone Mountain Snowtell for pretty much 3 months or 2.5 months, which is the majority of our ski season, really. So yeah, that's what we're talking about. It's just never been. Big Sky is a rocky mountain to ski on anyway. So when we're talking about record lows, you can only imagine how bad it gets. The locals, Ski Patrol, have been coming up with stickers for years in some attempt, I think, if you acknowledge that you're going to hit rocks, it somehow makes it better and you're cooler the more rocks you hit. So we'll see what new kind of stickers they come up with next year after the season of PTEX on the rocks on Lone Mountain. So yeah, those are just ones that have popped up over the years. This is the favorite one. If you're going to ski on it, it might as well be snow. So rocks are snow too. If you're unfamiliar with the operation, I'll just give you a quick rundown. Big Sky Resort is kind of centered around Lone Mountain, which is kind of a monolith, laccolith technically, of the northern Madison Range. And the ski area is comprised of almost 6,000 acres with relief of about 4,300 vertical feet. We have over 250 avalanche paths, like named avalanche paths, from alpine, large planar paths, to steep, technical, and complex, as well as numerous smaller paths and features at and below tree line. Some of the paths look like this. Here's sort of our large planar avalanche paths, generally on the south side of the mountain, and then some of the more steep, complex terrain on the north side of the mountain, formerly Moonlight Basin, and everything in between. We ski about 270 degrees off of Lone Mountain, lift service skiing, pretty much every aspect, avalanche paths on every aspect except for due west. The due west side of the mountain is wilderness and is some of our most heavily used side country, but we don't operate on the west side of the mountain. Quick little aerial view. That's the north side with the north summit, as well as the headwaters down and left there. The east side's in the sun there where the tram goes up, and then the south side of the mountain right there. So that's all inbounds terrain, and then this is the part that we don't operate, that Lone Lake Cirque on the west side of the mountain, but sees plenty of skier traffic anyway. Okay, so as far as Lone Mountain goes, it's high. We've got a high elevation alpine peak that tops out around 11,162 feet, at least before they shaved the top off of it to build the new tram. So not technically sure what it tops out at now. We'll probably have to get it resurveyed one of these years. It's also cold. We're 60 miles or so east of the Continental Divide at high latitude. So our daily average temp mid-mountain is about 23 degrees, and that's from October 1st through April 30th. And then most of our avalanche start zones are about 2,000 feet above that. So we have a cold snowpack on a high elevation peak, and it's a relatively dry place. particularly this year, but even on average, we average about 314 inches of snow between October 1st and May 1st, with peak SWE being just under 22 inches at its max, and that usually happens right around closing day. So we kind of build snowpack up until the day we close, not necessarily this year, and then it drops off from there. So all that to say is we pretty much are bullseyed in a solid continental snowpack, and that means that because of a thin early season snowpack in general and consistently cold temperatures, that we have consistent basal persistent weak layers in our snowpack, and that sort of two different types. We get sort of a crust on solar aspects early season from early season snow that facets above that and then develops slab on top of that, as well as a depth hoar problem on north and east, high elevation north and east aspects. In addition to that, it's a windy place. We get about 470 miles of wind per day, so over a 24-hour period that averages around 20 miles per hour. With the threshold of wind-transported snow somewhere around 15, 16 miles per hour, one could say that there is near constant redistribution of snow in the Alpine on Lone Mountain. And redistribution is often in the form of slab formation. And at higher velocities, we get hard slabs. So if we put hard slabs on top of persistent weak layers, that's pretty much the typical avalanche problem at Big Sky. It's what we spend most of our time and energy and stress dealing with is the deep persistent slab avalanche problem, which we consider our primary avalanche problem up at Big Sky for the most part. We do get storm snow avalanches. It does snow on occasion, never that much at any given time. So we do trigger storm snow avalanches, and we definitely trigger more storm snow avalanches than persistent, but it's not as complex of a problem. We don't spend nearly as much time, energy thinking about them. We just do that. It's an easier problem to navigate. Our general mitigation philosophy is usually pretty aggressive. We go out and do a lot of avalanche mitigation. We do some amount of avalanche mitigation about 3 out of every 4 days on the hill, from full-blown avalanche mitigation mornings to just special missions. We spend most of our days doing some amount of avalanche mitigation. When we know we have a deep, persistent instability, we don't baby those. We don't think about, well, if we just let it sit there, it'll heal. Time and history have told us that those instabilities don't heal, and if we have an opportunity to trigger that avalanche and clean it out, we are almost guaranteed to let it fill back in with stronger snow. Because of the wind transport up there, we'll fill it in with rounded grains, and in the meantime, we will break up our start zone. So if we can trigger a lot of smaller persistent slab avalanches, then we might be able to avoid the big persistent slab avalanches later in the season. So we do not baby known instabilities, and as a result, we use a lot of explosives. At least I think it's a lot of explosives. I'd be curious to see what Alta throws, but I guess with 800 inches of snow a year, you're probably going to throw more explosives than when you get 200 inches of snow a year. But we do throw a lot of explosives, generally about somewhere between 5,000 and 7,000 2-pound explosives over the course of the season. And if you divide that by how many inches of snow we get, it's a lot of explosives per inch of snow. And then there's, our opening philosophy is a little more conservative than our mitigation philosophy. And that's because we know what we're dealing with. We have a poor structure more often than not. We live in a world of conditional stability. It's never stable. It's just currently not going to avalanche, hopefully. So as a result, we're very conservative during initial openings of avalanche terrain. We have a long checklist of just things that need to line up before we open our big alpine terrain for the first time of the season. It gets easier as we go, keeping things open, but that first time we open things is very conservative. While things are open, it's not set and done. We monitor the cumulative load very closely. We often pull back during big loading events just to give ourselves a margin of error and close terrain temporarily as it's loading up. Meanwhile, we're continuing to test and use explosives and waiting for the loading to stop, continue testing before we reopen the terrain. We pay attention to pertinent results within the ski area, as well as regional avalanche cycles in the range, in the region, at other ski areas and whatnot. So we're paying attention to a lot of factors. And this sets us apart a little bit different from at least Bridger Bowl and maybe some other ski areas in that we don't put a lot of stock in skier compaction. And that's because in a lot of our terrain. When I talked about how we develop the snowpack, we develop hard slabs very quickly on top of our basal instabilities. So skier compaction has a hard time affecting our basal instabilities. So we ski on it, but it's generally not getting down and creating a more compacted snowpack, with exceptions, and that's terrain dependent. Some of our more skinnier, more complex terrain, that we can get through the snowpack a little better and get it in there. So we do have to rely on testing and explosives and forecasting more than skier compaction throughout the course of the season. So we're going to kind of get into how this year started. This is my first day at work, October 25th. There was 0.0 inches of SWE at the Lone Mountain Snowtell site and 0.0 inches of SWE on all visible terrain from the bottom terminal of a beautiful new tram. The next month is not that much better. Opening day was a day earlier than usual this year, November 22nd, and up until that point we had 27 inches of cumulative snowfall for the year, and we opened the mountain with an 8-inch settled base mid-mountain. Only snowmaking runs were open, and having grown up in the Northeast, it felt very familiar with the opening of Butternut Basin around Christmas in 1992. So, yeah, skiing on about 2 feet of man-made snow and looking over the side and say, I hope I don't catch an edge because I'm going to end up in those rocks and trees and sticks and bushes. So, yeah, you got to be pretty careful. Biggest storm was before we opened, and that was about 6 inches of snow at the beginning of October, and then nothing exceeded 4 inches through opening day. So, not dealing with a lot of snow on opening day. Like I said, we had this brand new tram, which was pretty cool. It opened December 19th, and there's no better way to celebrate the opening of a $50-some-odd million investment than only allowing scenics to the top of the mountain. So I'm sure the marketing would have loved a slightly more celebratory opening, but I guess you take what you can get. From a ski patrol standpoint, it was actually pretty nice because it felt like a soft opening. They could just let people ride the machine, and we didn't have to worry about them skiing off the top of the mountain. So I didn't complain. That's a blank slide for no reason. Yeah, then it started snowing. This was my first ride on the new tram, and I think Dave's as well, just to give you an idea of what the mountain looked like on the day that they were trying to open the tram. You know, you could see a little bit of snow pasted into some north aspects, but then you start to go around the compass a little bit, and there's just, not a whole lot of snow. That's a groom run over there. We can't open that one. Here's the bowl. We can't really open that. Well, maybe you could open right there. And then this is the Alto Ridge, which usually is just kind of a big plainer white thing, but I'd never seen so many trees and rocks off the Alto Ridge. So yeah, that's probably the last couple days of November there. And the reason we couldn't open off the top of the mountain is because this is our easiest run off the summit. This is Liberty Bowl, usually the first one that we open for the season. And when the tram opened, that's what Liberty looked like. So yeah, we weren't skiing off the top of the mountain. And then Wave, Lennon and Marks over here. You can see that there is snow in our inset paths. In particular, Marks is pretty much top to bottom snow. So we do have enough structure there that we are set up for some potential serious avalanche problem when the snow does arrive. So we're starting to put together the picture that this path might not be a problem because we can probably access some of these weak layers, but something like Marks or even the gut of Lennon does have enough planer and hard snow that it's going to keep us off those basal weaknesses, and we're going to have to forecast for those paths a little more closely than others. So then nothing really changed. Here's opening day here, and here's February. We go into a long duration purgatory where it doesn't really snow. We had this snowfall right before Christmas of about 9 inches, and then nothing that exceeds really 4 inches for the next 6 weeks. Not really building much height of snow, and our snowpack remains very thin, very weak. We have poor structure on all aspects, comprised almost entirely of either a crust or a facet and nothing in between. And we're also already seeing avalanche activity with minimal meteorological input or very small triggers. It might snow 2 inches and we'll get a persistent slab avalanche. It might blow for 3 hours and we'll get a persistent slab avalanche. A goat might walk across first or second dictator and trigger a large avalanche. This one got Instagram famous. Yeah, I think it was even on the Avalanche Center listed it. But yeah, so we're still getting avalanches despite it not snowing, and having not snowed in over a week. I believe that this instability did not heal very quickly after no recent snowfall. Also, it's very difficult to get around the mountain. I'm sure, as you can use your imagination looking at those pictures, like how do you even go to try to mitigate some of those hazards? And you kind of can't, and that's one of our bigger challenges. And that applies to both in the alpine and particularly below tree line, which is rare. We usually try to access the below tree line stuff pretty quickly, get it open to public, and then don't have to worry about that for the rest of the year. This is what getting around on north aspects looked like. It looks kind of snowy, but you're pretty much just hopscotching from rock patch to snow patch to rock patch to snow patch, and the travel is difficult. That's what it looked like trying to get around on solar aspects around that time of year. I should have put one of those rocks or snow stickers right there on my skis. So yeah, no, I mean, this is December on Lone Mountain. It's just not an easy place to get around and do the work. So that pretty much lasts until February. So we're already halfway through the season. It's got all the makings of a great season. February 1st, we've gotten up to 73 inches of year-to-date snowfall, which is what we should have on opening day. So as far as I'm concerned, we're about 6 weeks behind at this point. We're below 50% of our normal year-to-date snowfall. We only have just reached 24 inches of settled base mid-mountain. Somehow, through all of this, we're steadily opening alpine terrain. I believe Liberty Bowl finally did open right around Christmas time, and then we just added things to that. That said, we were opening terrain in conditions that I've never seen that terrain open in before, which did help us in the long run, but it wasn't a pretty sight at the time. In addition, the glades and lower mountain avalanche paths that we kind of have to stomp in are finally starting to open for the first time of the year as well, late January, early February. Very late for skiing in southwest Montana. So I'm going to highlight some of the challenges that we had to deal with in managing sort of this atypical snowpack, mostly just lack of snowpack. And like I said, we usually have a very aggressive approach to managing the avalanche terrain on Lone Mountain. We had to be a little more aware this year that that aggressive approach involves putting personnel in that terrain very often, pretty much daily. There are advantages to doing that. We keep people in terrain so they're more familiar when conditions do change. We monitor the snowpack very closely. However, when you put people out there in conditions like that, they're more likely to get hurt just because of how rocky it is. So we kind of had this, should we be going to this stuff as often as we are, like we usually do, or is this the type of thing that we can back off of and just kind of let it do its thing for now and get there when the conditions do improve? We had pockets of snow, because the snow wasn't particularly connected, that remained unstable for very long periods of time. There were no events that were really helping this snow become more stable, so we had long-term instability, and it was very pockety. Any ride that someone took, caught and carried was very consequential, because it started in rocks, there was a pile of snow, and then it ended in rocks. So we had to be very aware. Ski cutting was very dangerous. Experience was very important if people were going out to know what they're getting themselves into. And messaging that to a patrol of over 100 people of varying degrees of experience level was becoming quite difficult. And we felt like maybe we were starting to lose the ability to subtly message all of these different things and keep our patrol safe. Balancing that was, if we don't go to these places daily or almost daily, when we do start to increase volume in these paths, it's only going to be more dangerous because we're going to be putting people into more hazard with more snow. So there was a point right around that time, late January, early February, where we did have a couple caught and carrieds, small pockets, but like I said, the rides were consequential. We did have a couple minor injuries, and there was a conversation of like, how do we do this? Are we doing this wrong, or are we okay doing what we're normally doing despite these atypical conditions? And I'm not going to say we altered what we were doing very much, but we were very conscious that this year was different, and we needed to be at least aware of the consequences of what we were asking people to do on a daily basis. We also had paths that were repeat offenders, and there were probably 2 instances where the same pocket of snow released 3 different times, and that's pretty rare on Lone Mountain because we usually fill avalanche paths in once they do avalanche with stronger snow. That was not the case this year. We would avalanche the snow away, and then it would sit exposed for 10 more days before it snowed again. And as soon as it snowed again, we'd have a repeat avalanche on the same avalanche path. This was one of those paths. This is just a small pocket right above the duck walk on the dirtbag wall, a Queen Low bench. And this avalanched like 3 times in a row. This was one of our caught and carrieds. And this pile on the duck walk, this is the road that accesses back to the swift current lift, was probably 15 feet deep on a road. This would have been a very, very bad outcome had the patroller not been able to get off to the side, self-arrest, and let the snow go past him. So it's not a large avalanche path. It's actually just a feature within a not huge avalanche path. But like I said, the consequences of riding these paths in these conditions were very high. The forecasting challenges in the Alpine during this time period was that there was very little load to work with. We had an unstable snowpack, we had a poor structure, we had a weak snowpack, but there was nothing really that was loading it up. With minimal snowfall and lack of loading winds, we rely very heavily on winds since it doesn't snow that much, to put whatever snow is available for transport into the start zones of our paths, and that's usually what creates our instability. We're known to get up an inch of SWE mid-mountain, and then if you actually measure that SWE in the Alpine, which Dave Brown has taken an interest in doing for the past several years, we can, that 1 inch of SWE at mid-mountain can easily be 4 to 6 inches of SWE in our Alpine start zones just through wind loading, and that puts a lot of stress on a weak snowpack. We didn't get that help this year. Our winds were generally out of the west and generally in the moderate range. And in Big Sky, we call that light. We have a different scale. We call it Big Sky light, and that's like swag moderate. And then this is like Big Sky moderate, and that's like swag heavy. And then we really only had one major wind event, and that's the dark red there, and that was out of the south. Usually by this time of the year, we will have had much more wind and heavier loading events. Our basal instability was very pockety as a result of this. And we entered a long duration persistent slab cycle. They were small avalanches, but we triggered some sort of persistent slab at the ground or within the old snow almost every day from December 5th through February 23rd. Here's just some depictions of the pockets of snow that were avalanching during that period of time. This is the headwaters terrain with numerous small pockets of old snow. Some of our bigger avalanches of the year were out in the North Summit complex, where we're actually triggering relatively large avalanches on our persistent weak layers. And then our south and east facing terrain, same thing, weak snowpack, but results were very pockety. Often these will go like 3 to 4 paths at a time together as they're connected, but nothing was connected. It was all bounded by terrain. So we were just triggering multiple small pockets every day. And then the south side, a couple larger results in our planar terrain. But as soon as the terrain became bounded, we could only pick out small pockets at a time. Avalanche size distribution. So this year, I did a quick analysis of the past 5 years of avalanche activity, and the number of avalanches that released within the old snow or at the ground was pretty normal. We triggered about 46 avalanches during that persistent slab cycle. The difference between this year and last year and the past 5 years is that most of our avalanches were limited by size due to volume to the size 2 category, with only 1 or 2 persistent slab avalanches that exceeded size 2. So normally we'll get sort of 10 to 12 avalanches size 3 and up, and this year was 1 to 2. I don't need to spell this, maybe I do need to spell this out just for myself to remember it. If it doesn't snow, you're not going to get very big avalanches. You're still going to get avalanches, you're just not going to be that big. And so that makes a lot of sense. It was kind of cool that that matched up with what we were actually seeing when I did the quick analysis there. This probably was our biggest avalanche of the year. It was one of our size 3s out of the North Summit snowfield. This released kind of mid-track in the North Summit and ran full track, probably about 2,000 vertical feet. There was quite a bit of volume in this area, so it picked up all this snow and brought it back down to the ground for the most part. And this avalanche occurred, Jack, can you help me out? On what day, give or take?
Early January.
I think it was, yeah, sometime early to mid-January. And this did fill back in, and luckily, or it did fill back in with stronger snow, and we have been able to ski this terrain for the past several weeks consistently, which has been great. We also had challenges that were not in the alpine, that were at tree line, and that's not that common on Lone Mountain. We tend to get a foot or 2 of snow on the lower mountain and open it, and people ski it up, but we don't have to worry about it. But we had minimal snowpack up until early February, and so patrol only was going through these areas, and even that was pretty limited just based on how many sticks and stumps and things you were going to hit. The snowpack was so faceted that compaction was relatively ineffective. You were definitely disturbing it, but it was still just facets in a slightly different, there were some facets over there, and they were just kind of get pushed around. It didn't really help create much structure in the snowpack. Once it finally did start snowing, we did enter a lower mountain avalanche cycle, and pretty late this year, January and early February, the lower mountain was acting up. We also had a broken lift that accessed some of our lower mountain avalanche terrain, and we were told that lift could open any day as soon as they got the part in. So we had to go there every day while it snowed, because every time we went there, we'd get full slope collapses. And this is the type of terrain that we don't normally think is avalanche terrain, but it theoretically could avalanche. And when you go there and the whole slope collapses, you want to continue to go there to make sure it's not the time that it's going to avalanche as soon as the lift opens. And it didn't, but it collapsed a lot. So we were able to navigate that reasonably well. But we did, we were having activity on the lower mountain. These are like on road cuts and below, below some of our open terrain, just kind of pushing on snow on road cuts. This is like slightly outside of our open terrain, but some snowboarders had gone out there and built a kicker and triggered an avalanche that we had to go probe a debris pile for because we didn't know when it happened. So the lower mountain was definitely acting up because we weren't able to get patrol traffic and any skier traffic on it prior to late January. So those were the challenges of the year. And now we can take a deep breath, because really the year wasn't that hard. Those were normal challenges, right? I mean, we deal with that every year, just sometimes we deal with a lot more volume, and it actually feels the intensity is dialed up. So on some levels, this year felt pretty easy at times. And this balanced rock out in Hanging Valley is one of my Serenity Now places. I do like to sit there and just enjoy that place. It's one of the prettier places on Lone Mountain. There were some advantages this year of not having any snowfall. Despite being the snowpack being thin and weak, we had small avalanches. The avalanche size was limited by minimal snowfall, lack of loading winds, and broken up start zones. When you didn't have hard slabs across all of your start zones and they're not connected, you're triggering small avalanches one at a time, and that's kind of easy. We did have the ability to access our basal weaknesses for longer in more places than we're used to doing. Like I said, we opened some of our summit terrain really early in really marginal conditions. That was intentional. We got skiers on things that normally skier compaction does not help with. And so that was an advantage for us to be able to access our basal weaknesses. We did do a lot more boot packing than we normally do. We had 6 weeks where there wasn't really anything to ski, and we had a full staff, and resort management was happy to keep that staff on as long as we put people to work, and we put people to work by boot packing and start zones. And we do that when we can, and we seem to have pretty good success with that. Knock on wood, we have yet to have a deep persistent slab avalanche release in an area that we have boot packed early season. So we had the structure that we could do that with, and we had the manpower to do it with, and we did more than we usually do. So that was great. As well, skier compaction, which I talked about, was more effective this year in more terrain than usual. We also had the advantage of warm temps. They're more comfortable than cold temps. We averaged about 4 degrees higher than normal from October through about now, with 2 distinct warm-ups, one a January thaw and then a secondary March thaw. The late January thaw was critical in creating some strength in particularly our solar aspects in the Alpine. This pretty much ended the persistent slab cycle on the south face of the mountain. We were skiing slush bumps on 2 feet of snowpack, and those in the troughs of the 2 feet of snowpack were rocks sticking up. So we pretty much just crushed wet snow into the basal weaknesses of most of our solar start zones that we could access. So that was a good thing, and it paid off because we haven't seen persistent activity on solar aspects since. And then we had further strengthening in mid-March during a secondary meltdown, and then another one as we speak, or as of yesterday, just ended. So it's been a pretty warm winter. Here's the first meltdown. This is wet loose, some full depth wet loose on January 17th. It should be a very cold time in southwest Montana at 10,000 feet. It was not. Obviously, we then built some snowpack and then did it all again in March and had more full depth wet loose activity in mid-March. All to say is we did build some strength on our solar aspects through the warm temperatures. Not as effective at building strength on northerly aspects, but it probably didn't hurt. Another advantage, I think, was an advantage and will continue to be an advantage in the future is this new tram. It has a new alignment, which created some opportunities. It also took away some opportunities. This is the old alignment of the tram that went right up the upper cirque, and the new alignment goes up the gullies. The old one used to go up here. We would do some blasting from the old tram, very effectively controlling the upper cirque. We don't have that option anymore. So there are some blasting considerations on the new tram. It's new terrain. The tram in general is closer to the start zones, like sometimes too close to be able to shoot it effectively, as well as some technological considerations like the doors don't open when it's running. So there are some things we have to work through still. That said, the tram is faster, gets personnel back up the mountain a lot quicker, so we can do secondary routes as needed, as well as increase reliability. Big Sky has the distinction of putting in new lifts and have them not working right off the bat, but the tram is not one of those. The tram has been a really nice machine from the get-go and a huge investment, and I think it has been and will continue to be an advantage to our program as having that brand new reliable machine. The old one was breaking. Another part that was easy about this year was the amount of time we actually had to go out and do avalanche mitigation and get up early. We showed up at work nearly half the time and did absolutely no avalanche mitigation this year. Long spells, 10 to 14 day spells where we just showed up and skied around. And that's pretty uncommon, particularly early season on Lone Mountain. Only 22% of our days required full avalanche mitigation work, so those are our like full early mornings. That's usually closer to about 35 to 40% of our day. So that was easier for the ski patrol in general, particularly for the snow safety team who gets there even earlier. So that felt easy to me. And due to the fact that we just didn't have that much to do on a lot of days, we were able to make some progress in things that were sort of deferred maintenance on our program. Like most things at Big Sky, we're about 10 years behind. We're just kind of getting our avalancher program back up and running, not trying to take it away for racks yet, although we are considering that. But we did recommission the north side the Avalancher, which hasn't really been used since the merger between Big Sky and Moonlight Basin. And it's used to more effectively mitigate avalanche hazard in the gum wall, which is sort of an out-of-the-way place that for most of the season is overhead hazard for North Summit skiers. So we do have to knock down hazard in that area. And then in the springtime, it often comes into skiing shape and sees quite a bit of interest the last month or so of the season. So it's been nice to get that. We haven't used it, like I said, in 15 years, so we needed to do the whole remote firing system, blast shield, all that stuff. And we don't have targets particularly well mapped out, so it's taken some thinking and some work to get that back in action. But in general, it's a good thing. It increases personnel and public safety in that area, and it's just another tool in the toolbox for mitigation on the North Summit complex and terrain. In addition, we had a lot more training opportunities. We outfitted the patrol with a fleet of BABINEAU-Z S's starting last year, which is a new beacon for a lot of the patrol, and it has a lot of features. If you don't use it, it's a very advanced, or has a lot of advanced functions. So thanks to Tucker and some other snow safety folks, they organized some clinics to get the entire patrol, raise their level of awareness of what the features of this beacon are, and get everyone's skill set up to the point that this beacon can handle. So that was something that we did with our downtime this year, which is great, as well as continue to do partner rescue drills, verification of some basic skill sets that we had started years ago and presented at ISSW, I believe in 2012, and have sort of been on and off with doing that skill verification since then. In addition, big thanks to Ella at Bridger. She talked me through how they use the Canadian InfoX to digitize their route sheets as well as use it as an occurrence database. So I spent a lot of my downtime creating the location map for Big Sky and starting to find out how we as an operation will use the CAA InfoX for these purposes. So that was a great thing to spend some downtime using. So the takeaways for the year in general is that, each season is a unique season. I no longer believe there's a normal or average to ski seasons. There are challenges for every year, whether those challenges are snowpack, operational, psychological. I would say the biggest challenge of this year for me personally, and I think for our operation, was psychological. It's just really hard to show up at a ski area when all you see for 14 days out on the forecast is sun. Like, there's gonna be no change. You still have to show up. You still have to do the work. It's not the job you signed up for. So there was definitely some psychological challenges this year of running an operation. That said, every year common themes and characteristics emerge, and it's really important to kind of latch onto those and start to file them away in your database so that when it happens again, you might be able to anticipate some of the things you'll do differently from what you normally might do. It was obvious, or became obvious this year that, and has been in the past, that experience and institutional knowledge do help during these extreme events or these uncommon events. John Hewland, Yunts, we had the structure and the snowpack in Marks to produce large avalanches, and early in the season, Yunts just turned and said, that's not going to avalanche this year. And it didn't avalanche this year. So keep those old guys around. They're not as fast as they used to be, but they know what they're talking about. As well, operational flexibility necessary to adapt during these events. We did things differently this year than we normally do. We would open, because you couldn't ski off the top of the mountain, we would let people walk up to the bottom of the avalanche paths and kind of walk up and then boot pack up them to a certain point. And that helped us in the long run by getting skier compaction in places that we wouldn't have been able to do if we were letting people ski from the top down or waiting for people to be able to ski from the top down. So Kranz is the place we did that, as well as Marks. And we don't always do that. We only do that when we have to and when it will benefit us. And in years like this, it benefited us to be flexible enough to open terrain without lifts. And then, use easier years to catch up and make some of the improvements I talked about in the last thing. Don't just sit on your hands and catch your breath. It's a good time to put the pedal to the metal, because not every year, thankfully, is going to be as bad as this year. Thanks.
One question. Anyone? You said that.
Sweet. I must have answered them all.
How'd the tram fare, did it increase your work, not so much from a snowpack standpoint, but just from a ski patrol standpoint? Did you have more people on the upper mountain that you were worried about?
Short answer, yes. We had more people skiing off the top of the mountain at any given time. I don't know the numbers, but it definitely felt busier. There was more medical, definitely more people up there that shouldn't have been up there, so more sea rides off the peak, which normally is not that big of a deal. Generally, people who get up there can ski down, but we got a lot of people who just came up for the ride and got about 100 yards down and couldn't make it any further. So yeah, a lot of more toboggan rides off the top of the peak. The skiing held up pretty well. The traverses held up pretty well. But yeah, there was about 30% more people skiing off the peak at any given time, give or take.
How about wooden CHELAN? I mean, how much of you ran that
That's
tram?
2 questions. So we've only
Yeah,
half the question. The tram did remarkably well with the wind.
what's the next one you run?
It depends on it depends a lot on the direction. It did pretty well up to about sustained 45, gusting to 60 out of the south, and then it had some more issues with some northwest gusts right around the tower that we weren't anticipating. But every day is a little different, and how the wind circulates in those cirques just changes for different velocities, different directions, and different elevation levels. So in general, it did very well in the wind and very well mechanically. Yeah.
All right, thank you, CHELAN. That was awesome.